My parents forced me to work from age 13 to earn my place while pampering my divorced sister, then demanded all my savings for her plastic surgery, so I called Grandpa, who removed them from his $300,000. Well, he never thought I'd be the kind of person to air my family's dirty laundry on the internet, but after what happened 3 months ago, I feel like I need to tell this story. Maybe it'll help someone else who's dealing with toxic family dynamics, or maybe it'll just help me process the absolute chaos that my life became when I finally stood up to my parents. Either way, here goes nothing. My name is Alex, and I'm 28 years old. I have an older sister, Jessica, who's 32, and our relationship with our parents has always been complicated. Actually, that's putting it mildly. The truth is, my parents have treated us completely differently our entire lives, and it took me way too long to realize just how messed up our family dynamic really was. Growing up, Jessica was the golden child. She could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. She was popular, pretty, got decent grades without really trying, and my parents acted like the sun rose and set on her. Meanwhile, I was the afterthought. I wasn't a bad kid. I got good grades, I stayed out of trouble, I was actually pretty responsible for my age, but none of that seemed to matter to my parents. They always made it clear that Jessica was their priority, and I was just there. The real turning point came when I was 13 years old. Jessica had just graduated high school and was starting college, and my parents were throwing money at her like it was going out of style. New laptop, new clothes, dorm room set up, spending money. They were financing her entire college experience without question. Meanwhile, I asked for a new pair of sneakers for school because mine had holes in them, and my dad sat me down for what he called a life lesson. He told me that I was old enough to start earning my keep and that if I wanted things, I needed to work for them. He said it would build character and teach me the value of money. At 13, I didn't really understand why I needed to learn these lessons when Jessica never had to, but I was a kid and I wanted to make my parents proud, so I went along with it. I got my first job that summer working at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and collecting shopping carts. It was technically illegal for someone my age to be working, but the owner was a family friend who paid me under the table. I worked 20 hours a week during the summer and 10 to 15 hours a week during the school year. My parents acted like they were so proud of my work ethic and responsibility, but looking back, I realized they were just happy to have me contributing financially to the household while they continued to spoil Jessica. The really messed up part was that I had to pay for all of my own stuff from that point on. My work money went toward my school clothes, my school supplies, my lunch money, even things like shampoo and deodorant. Meanwhile, Jessica's college expenses were completely covered, plus she got an allowance for fun money. When I asked why, I had to pay for my own necessities while she got everything handed to her. My mom would say things like, "Jessica is focused on her education and you're learning valuable life skills." This pattern continued throughout high school. I worked constantly, after school, weekends, summers, while Jessica floated through college on my parents' dime. When she wanted to study abroad, they paid for it. When she wanted to join a sorority, they covered the fees. When she needed a car, they bought her a brand new Honda. Meanwhile, I saved up for months to buy a beat-up used car with 150,000 miles on it, and my parents acted like I should be grateful for the learning experience. The favoritism was so blatant that other people started noticing. My friends' parents would ask me why I was working so much when other kids my age were just focused on school and having fun. Teachers noticed that I was always tired because I was working late shifts. Even my grandfather, my dad's father, started asking questions about why I seemed to have so many more responsibilities than Jessica ever had. My grandfather and I had always been close. He's this amazing man who built his own successful construction company from nothing and always emphasized the importance of hard work and treating people fairly. He'd pick me up sometimes after my shifts at various jobs and we'd go get ice cream or just drive around and talk. He never directly criticized my parents, but I could tell he didn't approve of how differently they treated Jessica and me. After high school, I managed to get some scholarships and financial aid for college, but I still had to work multiple jobs to cover my living expenses. My parents contributed exactly nothing to my education, claiming they had already invested so much in Jessica's future. Meanwhile, Jessica graduated with a degree she barely used and immediately got married to her college boyfriend. My parents paid for a $30,000 wedding that was basically a fairy tale production. I graduated college with a degree in accounting, minimal debt thanks to my scholarships and constant work, and immediately got a decent job at a mid-sized firm. For the first time in my life, I had a steady income and could actually save money instead of living paycheck to paycheck. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, but my parents acted like my success was no big deal because I'd had so much practice being responsible. Jessica's marriage lasted exactly 3 years. Turned out her husband was cheating on her and the divorce was messy and expensive. Suddenly, Jessica was back home with my parents, devastated and broke, and guess what? My parents immediately went into full support mode. They welcomed her back with open arms, cleared out their home office to make her a bedroom, and started financially supporting her again like she was still in college. Now, I want to be clear, I felt bad for Jessica about the divorce. Cheating is awful, and I wouldn't wish that heartbreak on anyone. But what happened next really opened my eyes to just how dysfunctional my family was. Instead of encouraging Jessica to get back on her feet and find a job, my parents enabled her to wallow in self-pity. She spent months sleeping until noon, watching TV all day and going out with friends while my parents paid for everything. When I suggested that maybe she should start looking for work or consider going back to school to update her skills, my parents acted like I was being cruel and unsupportive. Meanwhile, I was working my ass off, getting promoted, and building a life for myself. I'd managed to save up about $35,000 over the course of several years, money I was planning to use as a down payment on a house. I was finally in a position to achieve some of the stability that I'd been working towards since I was 13 years old. That's when Jessica decided she needed a fresh start. And apparently, her version of a fresh start involved getting extensive cosmetic surgery. We're talking about a complete package: breast augmentation, tummy tuck, liposuction, facial procedures. The whole thing was going to cost around $40,000. And she had convinced herself that looking different would somehow fix all her problems. My parents, of course, thought this was a wonderful idea. They talked about how Jessica deserved to feel confident again and how this would help her move forward with her life. There was just one problem: they didn't have $40,000 lying around. They'd spent their savings on Jessica's wedding and college. Plus, they'd been supporting her for months without any income coming in. That's when they came to me with the ask. My mom called me one evening and asked if I could come over for dinner because they wanted to discuss something important with me. I should have known something was up because they never invited me over for important discussions. Usually they just told me what they expected me to do. I showed up for dinner and they had clearly prepared a whole presentation. They started by talking about how proud they were of my success and my savings discipline. They mentioned how Jessica was going through such a hard time and needed family support. Then they got to the point. They wanted me to give Jessica the money for her cosmetic surgery. Not loan, give. They wanted me to hand over almost all of my savings, money I'd been working for since I was 13 years old, so that Jessica could get plastic surgery to feel better about herself. I was stunned. I asked them if they were serious, and they started laying on the guilt thick. They said family helps family. They said Jessica would pay me back eventually once she got back on her feet. They said I was being selfish by hoarding money when my sister was suffering. My dad even said that since they'd invested so much in teaching me the value of hard work, I should be grateful for the opportunity to help my family. I pointed out that I had been working since I was 13 to save this money, that I had plans for it, and that it wasn't fair for them to expect me to give up my future to fund Jessica's cosmetic surgery. I also pointed out that they'd never asked Jessica to sacrifice anything for me, ever. That's when things got really ugly. My mom started crying and saying I was being cruel to Jessica when she was already down. My dad got angry and started yelling about how I was being ungrateful after everything they'd done for me. They said if I really loved my family, I'd find a way to help. They even threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't step up for Jessica. I left that night feeling like I was going crazy. Was I really being selfish? Was I wrong to want to keep the money I'd worked so hard for? I called a few friends to get their perspective, and they were all horrified by what my parents had asked of me. They confirmed what I already knew deep down. This request was completely unreasonable and unfair, but I was still torn because, despite everything, these were my parents. I wanted their approval and love, even though they'd never really given me either. I spent about a week agonizing over what to do, and that's when I decided to call my grandfather. I haven't told him about the situation yet, but when I explained what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said something that changed everything. "Alex, I've been watching this favoritism for years, and I've stayed quiet because they're my son and daughter-in-law. But this crosses a line. They've been using you since you were a child, and now they want to take away your future to fund your sister's vanity project. This stops now." My grandfather asked me to come over that weekend, and when I got there, he had his lawyer present. He explained that he'd been planning to leave his estate, which was worth about $300,000, equally between my parents and his other son, my uncle. But after hearing about what they'd asked of me, he was changing his will. He was removing my parents completely from his inheritance and instead leaving their portion directly to me. He said that he'd watched me work hard my entire life while they spoiled Jessica, and he wasn't going to let them guilt me into giving up my savings for something so frivolous. He said the money I'd inherit would be my reward for years of being responsible and self-sufficient, and that my parents had shown they couldn't be trusted to treat their children fairly. I was shocked. I hadn't called him expecting anything like this. I just wanted advice and emotional support. But my grandfather was firm about his decision. He said he'd been considering making this change for a while anyway, and the cosmetic surgery situation was just the final straw. He told me not to tell my parents about the will change immediately. He wanted to see what they would do next, and he wanted me to make my own decision about the money without them knowing about the inheritance. I went home that weekend feeling more supported than I had in years, having my grandfather validate my feelings and take such a strong stand on my behalf made me realize that I wasn't crazy. My parents really had been treating me unfairly my entire life. When my parents called the next week to ask about my decision regarding Jessica's surgery money, I told them no. I explained that I wasn't going to give up my savings for cosmetic surgery and that I thought they needed to reconsider their priorities. I suggested that Jessica could get a job and save up for the surgery herself if it was really that important. To her dot, they were furious. My dad accused me of being heartless and selfish. My mom said I was destroying our family and that Jessica might never recover from this betrayal. They said I was cut off from the family until I came to my senses and did the right thing. Honestly, being cut off was almost a relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking on eggshells trying to earn my parents' approval or prove that I was worthy of their love. I could just live my life without constantly being compared to Jessica or being expected to sacrifice for her benefit. 2 months went by without any contact from my parents. I heard through other relatives that Jessica had gotten a job at a retail store and was slowly starting to get her life together, which I was actually happy about. I hoped that maybe she would realize that working and being independent felt better than being dependent on our parents. Then my grandfather got sick. It wasn't life-threatening, but he ended up in the hospital for about a week with pneumonia. My parents, of course, rushed to his bedside and started playing the role of devoted son and daughter-in-law. They probably figured this was their chance to get back in his good graces after our family drama. That's when my grandfather decided to drop the bomb. While they were visiting him in the hospital, he told them about the will change. He explained that he was disappointed in how they'd treated me over the years and that their request for me to fund Jessica's cosmetic surgery was the final straw. He told them that their portion of his inheritance was now going directly to me. According to my uncle, who was there when it happened, my parents were devastated. My dad apparently tried to argue that they'd been good parents and that this was all a misunderstanding. My mom started crying and saying that they'd made mistakes, but they were still family. They begged him to reconsider, but my grandfather stood firm. He told them that they'd had years to treat their children fairly, and they'd chosen not to. He said that I had earned the inheritance through years of hard work and responsibility, while they had shown poor judgment and favoritism. He said the decision was final. My parents left the hospital and immediately started blowing up my phone. They were alternating between anger and desperation. One minute they were yelling at me for manipulating my grandfather, and the next minute they were begging me to talk to him and convince him to change the will back. I didn't answer their calls. I was done being their emotional punching bag and their backup plan for funding Jessica's lifestyle. I'd spent 15 years trying to earn their love and approval, and it had never been enough. I wasn't going to spend any more energy on a relationship that had always been one-sided. My grandfather recovered from his pneumonia and came home after a week. He called me when he got settled and said he didn't regret his decision at all. He said watching my parents' reaction in the hospital had only confirmed that they saw me as a resource rather than as their child. He said he was proud of me for standing up for myself and not giving in to their demands. Jessica reached out to me about a month after the hospital incident. She didn't know all the details about the will situation, but she knew that our parents and I were estranged and that it had something to do with the cosmetic surgery money. She apologized for the whole situation and said she never meant for it to cause such a rift in the family. I appreciated her apology, but I also explained to her how the favoritism had affected me over the years. I told her about working since I was 13 while she got everything handed to her, about paying for my own necessities while she got an allowance, about funding my own education while our parents paid for hers. She seemed genuinely surprised by some of it, which made me realize that she might not have been fully aware of how differently we were being treated. Jessica said she was starting to understand why I'd been resentful and that she was working on becoming more independent. She'd kept her retail job and was actually saving money for the first time in her life. She said the experience of being on her own was hard, but also empowering in a way she hadn't expected. We've been slowly rebuilding our relationship since then. It's not perfect, and there's still a lot of history to work through, but I appreciate that she's making an effort to understand my perspective and change her own behavior. My parents, on the other hand, are still furious. They've tried everything from guilt trips to threats to get me to convince my grandfather to change his will back. They've told other relatives that I'm being vindictive and manipulative. They've accused me of turning my grandfather against them out of spite. The truth is, I never asked my grandfather to change his will. I just told him what was happening and asked for advice. His decision to remove them from his inheritance was entirely his own, based on years of watching their favoritism and this final request that crossed the line. Some relatives think I should try to reconcile with my parents and convince my grandfather to reconsider. They say family is family and that holding grudges isn't healthy. But I don't see this as holding a grudge. I see it as finally setting boundaries and refusing to be treated as less valuable than my sister. I'm not vindictive or cruel. If my parents had genuine emergencies or serious health problems, I would help them. But I'm not going to sacrifice my financial security and my future to fund cosmetic surgery for my sister, and I'm not going to pretend that their years of favoritism didn't happen just to keep the peace. My grandfather is 78 years old and in good health, so hopefully this inheritance situation won't be relevant for many years. But knowing that he sees my worth and wants to reward my hard work and responsibility has been incredibly healing for me. For the first time in my life, I feel like an adult and my family has truly seen me and valued me for who I am. I've used some of my savings to put a down payment on a small house, and I'm finally building the stable, independent life I've been working towards since I was 13. I have a good job, good friends, and a relationship with my sister that's improving. I'm not in contact with my parents right now, and honestly, my mental health has never been better. The whole situation has taught me that sometimes standing up for yourself means disappointing people who claim to love you. It's taught me that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and love, not on one person constantly sacrificing for others. And it's taught me that it's never too late to stop accepting treatment that you don't deserve. If you're dealing with family favoritism or being pressured to sacrifice your own well-being for others, I want you to know that your feelings are valid. You deserve to be treated fairly, and you don't owe anyone your financial security or your future just because you're related to them. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is set boundaries, even when it's difficult and even when other people don't understand. My grandfather often says that respect is earned, not given, and that goes for family relationships too. I spent years trying to earn my parents' love and approval, but I've learned that real love shouldn't have to be earned. It should be freely given. I'm grateful for the hard lessons this situation has taught me, and I'm optimistic about building healthier relationships in the future.